Good evening. See, that good evening is to let these others know that somebody was here listening to me, otherwise they'd think I was alone. Because this message, within a few weeks, goes out all over the world. And what we have here tonight will soon be heard on the mainland in Canada, England, Australia, Africa, New Zealand, quite a few places on the globe. So it is necessary for them to know that we have an audience. Last week, we started with the subject of prayer. Prayer from the standpoint of a mystical message, not from the standpoint of prayer as it is ordinarily understood, asking God, begging God, beseeching God, trying to influence God in our behalf, or even in behalf of our patients or students. But the prayer that is a conscious communion with God, a conscious at-one-ment with God, in which our part is the passive one of listening. In the true mystical prayer, you do not say anything to God. You do not tell God anything. You never use any means to try to get from God or to influence God. Rather, the prayer of mysticism is an emptying out, more in the nature of, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," or "Fill me with all thou art," or "Let me see spiritually, let me hear spiritually, open my eyes." There's a hymn, isn't there, in the Unity hymnal? Open my eyes that I may see, open my ears that I may hear. That is more the nature of the mystical prayer, inner awareness. Now, it isn't possible to attain that quickly. We of the Occident have never been trained to an inner stillness, to inner listening. We have been trained to speak, to think thoughts, but not to listen for that still small voice. That is a teaching of the Near East and of the Far East. Only in this generation are we beginning to really understand how to attain an inner silence, an inner stillness, into which the voice of God can thunder. It is for this reason that there are steps which we take, which we practice, leading up to that moment when we attain the ability to be still and to listen. Now, as you know, all of the metaphysical, spiritual approaches to life are meant, first of all, to bring us into living spiritually, living in accord with the laws of God, the will of God, molding our desires, our wishes, our hopes, our ambitions to the will of God instead of to the fulfillment of human ambitions and human desires. Along with that, we give to the world all of the metaphysical, spiritual approaches of this modern day, gives to the world the subject of spiritual healing, a much misunderstood subject From our standpoint, let it be said that spiritual healing is accomplished in two ways. Either through individuals who have received the grace of God, which appears as a healing consciousness, or through a conscious knowing of the correct letter of truth, which eventually leads to the development of that spiritual consciousness. Now, making affirmations and denials, or uttering metaphysical cliches, is not knowing the correct letter of truth, nor is it giving an intelligent or loving treatment. Healing work is brought about primarily through treatment. Treatment is sometimes used as a synonymous term with prayer. It really isn't. It is a preliminary step to prayer, but for spiritual healing an absolutely necessary one, except to those few who have been given by grace the healing consciousness. To give a treatment intelligently should be the object of every truth student, metaphysical student, regardless of which of these approaches they may follow. The object of Christian Science, of divine science, of unity, of the infinite way, the object of all of these teachings is exactly the same: bringing about spiritual living in the experience of the individual and giving them some understanding of the nature of treatment, so that through the practice of metaphysical treatment the spiritual consciousness may be developed. Now let me explain that to you so that you understand it thoroughly, because without understanding you will not approach that spiritual consciousness. You can't approach it through blind faith. You cannot approach it merely through making metaphysical statements, even if those statements are true statements. Behind every statement of truth you make, behind every treatment you give, there must be understanding. Now, when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Garden of Eden because of the acceptance of the belief of two powers, good and evil, the human experience began. And it is a very difficult experience, because in it there are two powers always warring with each other: the power of good and the power of evil, the power of sin and the power of purity, the power of health and the power of disease. And judging from the experience of the world, evil is much more powerful than good. Now, when it came to the period of organized religions, these two powers were unfortunately perpetuated. Only now their names were changed. And the name of good became God, and the name of evil became devil or Satan. But even in the religious life, we had the same two powers that threw Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. We had good and evil under the name of God and devil or Satan. And the two always warring with each other. In the same way, evil usually seems to get the better of good, because evil exists in the world much more than good does. Now, the end of that reign of the two powers was started when the first of the metaphysical movements came into being in the 19th century. And it was revealed in those days that all of these thousands of years of good and evil warring with each other were not only unnecessary, but they were untrue, because there never were two powers. There was only one power, and that was God power, spiritual power. And that which had been feared as evil and fought as evil was never a power. It was a belief entertained in human consciousness. Of course, it acted as power as long as the belief could remain there. But these early metaphysical movements made it very clear that that was what was wrong with the world, was a continuing of the belief in two powers. Now, in those early days, they coined a new term for what Paul had called the carnal mind. Now, the carnal mind really wrecked Paul, because he did not quite see through the fact that carnal mind wasn't an entity or an identity, but this false sense of power. But with this beginning of the metaphysical movements, it was finally revealed that this carnal mind, which has now been called mortal mind, was really not a power at all. It was a nothingness. It was a belief entertained in human thought, and that if you were wise, you could take the sum total of all evil, whether appearing as sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, storms, wars, man's inhumanity to man, all of these were to be seen as effects, the cause of which was carnal or mortal mind, but that this so-called mortal mind wasn't a mind, but an illusory substance, a hypnotic influence that made us accept evil as power. The result of this revelation was such that within 25 years, 30 years, Christian Science, Unity, and Divine Science became international organizations with thousands upon thousands of practitioners doing the most wonderful healing works. So much so that in the 1890s, when the organized materia medica movement was trying to outlaw the metaphysical practice, the only reason that the legislatures of the world sanctioned the practice was because of the demonstrable healings that had taken place and were taking place. And behind all these healings was this great principle: there is only one power, and that's God. And every other power, so-called power, whatever its name or nature, could be given the general designation of carnal mind or mortal mind, and then arm of flesh or nothingness. This enabled practitioners to take cases of cancer, consumption, polio, infectious diseases, contagious diseases, walk right into them and never come out with one of them. It enabled them to take cases and stop the infection and the contagion before it could spread. Why? Not because infection or contagion are powers over which they had control, but rather because it had been revealed to them that these were not power, and such power as they seemed to have existed only because they were so accepted in universal human thought. Unfortunately, we come to another era of crystallization, and we find our own metaphysical friends beginning to fear mortal mind and do protective work from it and set up defenses against it and call up practitioners and say, please get busy, mortal mind is after me. Mortal mind, which it has been revealed, is the arm of flesh or nothingness or no power. So that we came up to this present era with two powers in metaphysics again, the divine mind on one side and mortal mind on the other side, and always praying that divine mind would be strong enough to wipe out mortal mind or overcome it or destroy it. You see why it is repeated to you so often that the infinite way can never be organized? Because it has nothing at all to give the world that the world hasn't already got, and which the world can't practice, if it will, in their home, in their church, or out of it, since the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. All that we need in the infinite way is sufficiently to prove that what the world calls carnal mind or mortal mind isn't mind, but is the arm of flesh or nothingness, is illusion, is not to be feared or hated or worked against. So that, now mark this, you cannot give a treatment intelligently, a metaphysical treatment, unless you start with the realization that since God is all power, that you do not require any power to do anything, to anything, for anything, or anybody, or any reason. That you must anchor yourself in, first of all, that there is but one power, and that power is God, and therefore you don't even need God power, for God is already the power that created the universe, maintains it, and sustains it, and the responsibility is on your shoulder to know this truth. You are not going to God in the infinite way to influence God to do something to you or for you, or to your patient or for your patient. No, you are going to God for reassurance that God alone is, and that there is no power. I shall not fear what mortal man can do to me. I shall not fear what mortal mind can do to me. I shall not fear infection, contagion, so forth, so on. In the degree, remember, of your realization is the success of your treatment. Do not think for a moment that we have all 100% successes in our treatment work or in our healing work. I don't know of anyone who has yet attained 100%. I say to you that you can have 100% if you can attain the full Christ consciousness of one power, so that you do not refute error or deny it or struggle against it, but rather realize the truth of the Sermon on the Mount. Resist not evil. This is the secret. You have heard it said of old, all these other things that you must do. But I say unto you, resist not evil. Why would the Master say to us, resist not evil, if evil had any power to exert over us? Now, no treatment will ever result in any better healing than the nature of the treatment itself that you give. Don't expect any more of healing from your treatment than the quality of the treatment you give. There is no mysterious God sitting around to do your work for you. God is doing God's work, creating, maintaining, and sustaining this universe in perfect harmony. And the discords and inharmony are unknown to God. They're only known to us. And they're only known to us in the degree that we live and move and have our being outside of the divine awareness, in the degree that we are influenced by what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Now, a human being is like a weather vane. It sways this way and that way. It swings this way and that way in accord with whatever the beliefs of the moment may be. It finally comes to the papers that it's a boom and we begin to prosper. And then we hear of a depression and we begin to pull in our expenditures and sort of save up a bit more. We read of infections and contagions and immediately we're down in bed with them. In other words, a human being living the ordinary human life is not in control of his own life or body. He is swayed by the universal beliefs, and more especially the stronger ones of any given moment. Now, that was not our original status. In the beginning, in the first chapter of Genesis, we were told that we were given dominion. We were given dominion over everything on this earth, and beneath it and above it. We were given dominion. In the centuries that have gone by since then, we seem to have given over that dominion to the weather, to climate, economic conditions, governments, so that we look everywhere outside of ourselves for that which really should be coming forth from within ourselves, a complete dominion. It is possible to regain that dominion, but I say to you truthfully, it can only be done through conscious effort. Conscious effort, determined effort, persistent effort, consistent effort. In no other way. Inertia is really in control of the human mind, so that just 100 years ago, our ancestors would have given their right arm for the books that are published, that are available to us and our generation today, and our generation throws them aside in order to buy picture books and picture magazines and moving pictures and television screens. Anything that will not exert the brain, anything that will not cause us to think. I know it is said that one picture is greater than 10,000 words, and that's true of the illiterates. That statement was made for illiterates, for lazy people. 10,000 words are worth more than 100,000 pictures to the person who desires to have knowledge. You won't find much knowledge in pictures. Pastime, yes, not knowledge. Knowledge is to be found in books, in words, in thoughts, in the consciousness of thinkers. And if you want to know what's in the consciousness of thinkers, you have to get inside their consciousness, and you can do that pretty well by means of their written words. That is why I say that you have to first shake off inertia and really have a desire to have dominion. Then when you have the desire to have dominion, you learn the basic principles of truth. And then when you've learned them, you put them into practice. Too many students really believe that learning them is sufficient. It isn't. It isn't. You have to put them into practice by living them and by using them in treatments. It is true that if you give enough treatments over enough years, that eventually your treatments will have far less of words and thoughts in them, but that is only because those words and thoughts are ingrained in your consciousness, not because you can afford to skip them. Let no one believe that a metaphysical treatment is really of any value whatsoever if it doesn't include within it your understanding that there is only one power and that you are not going to use one power over another power. Don't think for a minute that you have helped your patient or student if you're still expecting God to do something for them, or if you hope to and believe that your treatment is going to get God to do something for them. God's work is done. God is the same yesterday and today and forever, and let no one try to influence God on your behalf. You must put into every treatment you give every bit of the metaphysical understanding that you have. The first and most important point of all is this one that I have just given you. Unless you can go into your meditation absolutely convinced, absolutely stating and declaring and affirming the one power and the nothingness of that which appears to you as sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation, your treatment isn't complete and isn't really powerful. So many of our physical problems concern themselves with organs and functions of the body. Every treatment must include the truth that mind is the substance of the bodily organs and functions. Mind does not act upon these. Mind is formed as these. There isn't a cell of the body, of the bones. There isn't a cell of blood that isn't a center of intelligence, which it couldn't be unless its very nature were mind. There is no such thing as mind over matter. The secret is mind formed as matter. You see, if I place my hand here, I have a completely dead hand. Of itself, it can do nothing. It can't give, it can't withhold, it can't pet, it can't punch. It can do nothing. I must do it. And this hand cannot refuse to function except as I function it through the act or will of mind. And when my mind wants to give, that hand carries out the act of giving. And when it wants to withhold, that hand carries out the organ of withholding. And if you believe for a moment that the organs and functions of your body are not responding to the activity of your mind, you have not yet awakened to the basic truth of metaphysical practice. The organs and functions of your body are not something separate from your mind. Therefore, there's no use of merely trying to prod the body unless, first of all, you are trying to understand the activity of the mind. Once you put into your treatment the fact that mind functions the organs and functions of the body, that mind functions the muscles of the body, you are beginning to give an intelligent treatment, because that is the fact. The body itself can do nothing or be nothing. Sometimes people believe that if they have an accident, that the mind had nothing to do with it. be assured of this: the mind prepared the way for the accident. The mind prepares the way for every experience that comes to you, even though, as truth students, we love to pass up the master statement that as ye sow, so shall ye reap. We love to sort of turn away from that and feel that it really wasn't meant for us. But let us not fool ourselves. The body is carrying out the functions of the mind. And what the body does has to first be thought or accepted in mind. Not in the sense, of course, that if you lack, that it's because you thought lack. Not if you have an automobile accident that you thought automobile accident. Oh, no, it isn't quite as simple as that. No. But the preparation for everything that happens to your body first must take place in your mind. You know, it was said many, many years ago in metaphysics, but it is being repeated now by doctors, that a person cannot die until they give their consent. In some way or other, they prepare the body for its experiences. Whether or not it's because the belief that age is coming on them, or whether it's because their families are not as considerate as they once were, and they're starting to withdraw. But in one way or another, the human being's mind prepares him for the experiences that lie just ahead. So that every treatment has to contain within itself this point: I and my Father are one. All that the Father hath is mine. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. And the mind of God forever governs, maintains, and sustains me. Now you see, that in itself keeps us free of the belief that we need man whose breath is in his nostril, even if it's a son or a daughter or a brother or a sister or a husband or wife. In our inner life, even though we do enjoy the companionship of husband, wife, children, or parents, even though we do enjoy companionship with each other on this path, as so many of you have seen that we do, nevertheless, you have to reserve a place within yourself where you realize these things are joyous but not necessary. I and my Father are one. All that I will ever need is provided for me from within. It is only in this way that we can watch the changing scenes without, that we can watch our friends and our relatives come and go, and still remain anchored in the realization that my needs are always fulfilled from within. You see, in spite of the fact that our country and Canada and England, Germany, Japan, are now going through periods of what we call prosperity or boom, do not forget that this touches only a very small part of the population of the world. Even if all of these countries were completely prosperous, it still would only be touching a small part of this world. And as a matter of fact, that prosperity is not even nationwide in our country. I still know parts of the United States that haven't got public schools. And whatever schooling the children are getting, they're getting by contributions from individuals who provide schools where the communities do not. Now, if we are, first of all, to set the example for the world, and if we don't, it will be sad for the world. I read this today. The Church of England appointed a committee to sit for 5 years examining into the subject of spiritual healing. And last summer, the church issued its 5-year report. And one of the things it said in there was that the only reason that the Christian Science Church flourishes and other organizations devoted to spiritual, mental, and spiritualistic healing is because of the failure of the church to perform the functions and to call attention to the world of the Christ nature of healing. Well, therefore, these metaphysical movements are waking up that part of the world to its responsibilities. So it is going to be, if the world is to be awakened to the true nature of supply, of abundance, it will have to first learn the principles from those who have discovered them and are practicing them and are demonstrating them. Then, if just the amount of people in this room were really to be demonstrating spiritual supply or demonstrating supply spiritually, you can imagine how many of your neighbors, friends, or relatives would want to get on that bandwagon. And in the course of time, we would cover a community and a state and a nation and then cross the borders. Then if we are to demonstrate an abundance of supply, rest assured we cannot do it unless we know the principle of supply and, knowing it, put it into our treatments every single day until we demonstrate it. All right. You can check up now and see whether after your years of study you have caught the secret of the principle of abundant supply, because I'm going to give it to you clearly, and it's going to take 2 whole minutes, because that's how long it takes to know the secret of supply. But I don't mind telling you, it takes years to put it into practice. If you can break through inertia enough to give yourself a good treatment every single day, and your friends and your relatives and your enemies, until this treatment becomes a realized consciousness, and then after that you only have to remind yourself of it occasionally in order to stay in the spirit. Now, the secret of supply is this: God is the only supply there is. Money is not supply. Investments are not supply. Money comes and goes. Investments comes and goes. Real estate is not supply. It comes and goes. There is only one supply that is not only infinite, eternal, but is also omnipresent and never comes and never goes. That's God. God realized is infinite, omnipresent supply. Now, any true students who are trying to demonstrate supply from any other basis are doing nothing more than the human being who is a good go-getter. They may demonstrate a little temporary money or properties, but it isn't supply. Supply is never supply until you have it forever and forever in infinite abundance. That means a sufficiency with 12 baskets full left over to share. Now, think of this. God alone is supply. Therefore, to have supply, one must have God. Or you say, well, God is everywhere, equally present. That's true in the abstract. That's a very good absolute statement of truth. It's good absolute metaphysics. It's a very bad demonstration. God is not omnipresent until God is realized. If God, or the omnipresence of God, were enough to be supply, then I can tell you right now that Russia and China and all of these bankrupt countries would be running over with supply because God fills those countries as well as this one. But that isn't enough. Just as God is the answer to health, that isn't doing the people any good who are sick or dying, the fact that God is health. God only becomes a demonstrable experience in proportion as God is realized. And that's the nature of treatment, to bring us to that state of consciousness in which we can realize God. Therefore, when we go into treatment, which is a preliminary to prayer, we must make use of the correct letter of truth. God is supply. Scripture tells us that I am the bread, the meat, the wine, the water. I am life eternal. I am the resurrection. And this I that the Master was referring to is God. God is my bread, my meat, my wine, my water. And where God is realized, there is my sufficiency. Now, when the Hebrews were going through the wilderness, there was a Moses there to consciously realize the presence of God. There was just as much God there if there had been no Moses. But that surely did the Hebrews no good. It was only because there was a Moses to consciously realize the presence of God that the Hebrews were fed, that manna fell from the sky, that the Red Sea was opened, that water came from the rocks. In the wilderness with Elijah, there was plenty of God and poor widows and sons to be sold into slavery for poverty. It took an Elijah to bring forth infinite supply, even to be fed by ravens, even to find cakes baked on the stones. It took one individual consciously realizing God. Then the miracles appeared. In the experience of Christ Jesus, one must certainly agree that God was very present with those Hebrews, even without a Jesus. What good did it do them? They were an-hungered. And one individual lifting his eyes, acknowledging God's presence, fed them and had 12 baskets full left over. God was there when all the sick people were there. It took a Jesus to consciously realize God, to bring healing to them, to raise them from the dead. There is plenty of God all over this world, but for spiritual healing, it takes an individual imbued with this truth to bring forth the healing. Now, your mind, you as an individual, your mind imbued with truth is a law of harmony unto my body and my business and my art and my profession and my welfare. My mind imbued with truth becomes a law of harmony unto your body, your business, your being, your happiness, your freedom, your welfare. In proportion as my mind is imbued with truth, do you receive healing and grace. In proportion as your mind is imbued with the correct letter of truth and then ultimately the consciousness of truth, does your family benefit, and then your patients and your students. Never believe for a moment that there is some kind of an unknown power operating for your good or mine, because the power is conscious realization of truth. Surely, if you could meditate, or if you are at that point where in your meditation God announces itself so that you know you have God presence, then of course you may not need to know so much of the letter of truth. You have already attained God itself. But you know as well as I do how seldom that experience comes to your life. How seldom it is that you really feel that the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. You know how seldom you really have that inner conviction that where I am, God is. You know how seldom it is that you hear that still small voice. And so it is that if you hope to attain greater God consciousness, it means that you have to devote more hours of the day, more days of the week, more weeks of the month to a conscious practice of truth. You have to take these principles, such as I have given you tonight, and work with them individually and specifically until you feel that now you have voiced them all and thought them all. Now you can stop for a moment and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. I'm waiting for thy voice." Then you sit for a minute or two in a receptive consciousness, and sometimes you actually feel that the Spirit of God does touch you. Other times you don't have any feeling about it, but you don't have to worry about that either, because even if you don't, you have really invoked the law. That is, you have brought the law into operation by your treatment. There are times when we really have a feeling within that God is on the field, but there are other times where we have no such feeling, no such conviction. It's as if really the treatment were a failure so far as we're concerned, but it isn't. It's never a failure as long as you realize that you have done your part, and if there is no outer change, you're willing to do it again 2 hours from now. You see, too many students like to feel that if they give themselves or others one treatment in a day, that the rest of the day is up to God to come back to them. It isn't that way at all. It isn't that way. No one can lay out for you a program. I have seen some very serious claims met in something less than a treatment. I have seen some very simple things that took days and weeks and months and sometimes years before the healing took place. Do you know why that is? Because we are blocking the healing. Either the practitioner or the patient themselves are blocking the healing by holding on to self-will in some regard that they're not yet ready to loose. You know the story I've told in class about the two men who were at the bar drinking, and one turned to the other and said, "You'll have to stop drinking. Your face is blurred." As far as we're concerned, it's always your face that's blurred, not my eyesight. And so it is that you must remember, this is a spiritual universe. God made this universe, and he looked at it and found it good. Therefore, the discords and the inharmonies and the injustices aren't in the world, they're in what we are beholding of the world, what we are seeing and hearing. With what ears? Are we listening with these ears or the inner ears? Are we seeing with these eyes or the inner eyes? Surely, with our 5 physical senses, we will always behold a certain amount of good and a certain amount of evil. It is only when we get into the withinness, into our divine faculties, that we see this universe as it is. And then, regardless of the sinner we may be looking at or the dying person, the voice says within, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." And you open your eyes and you say, "It doesn't look that way." And indeed it doesn't if you insist on seeing with the eyes and hearing with the ears. You can never know of God's grace or God's kingdom with the five physical senses. That's why the prayers that you pray with your mind never reach God. That's why the tens of millions who go to church to pray for peace have never yet witnessed peace on earth. The most they've ever witnessed, and the best, is a little interval between wars. Never has there been peace on earth, and there never will be as long as people continue to pray with their minds, as if they expected God to sit there and answer their wishes. Of course, really and truly, those who are praying don't really want peace. They want peace at my price. Give us our will, let us be the victor. That's what we call peace. Let us understand this very clearly. Knowing the letter of truth in treatment is not really the spiritual healing agency. It is that which sets our mind at rest so that the divine consciousness can manifest itself in and through our mind and thought. You can never find inner peace while you are trying to get a great power like God to do something to error. You can never find inner peace while you are expecting God to give you supply or companionship or a home. You will only find peace inwardly when you surrender human desire, turn within and realize God is my need and God is the fulfillment of my need, and therefore my only desire is to know God, whom to know aright is life eternal. That's the whole secret of the Bible. To know Him aright is life eternal. To know Him aright is infinite abundance. To know Him aright is to know love. Incoming love and outgoing love. Incoming wisdom and outgoing wisdom. To know Him aright is to know divine harmony. But to seek for harmony separate and apart from Him is useless. To seek for health separate and apart from Him is useless. To seek for supply separate and apart from Him is useless. One thing only do I desire: to know Thee aright. Whom to know aright is life eternal. May the thoughts of my mind and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in Thy sight, and they will be acceptable if we go to God as emptiness. And in the realization there's no God power to do something to somebody. God power is to be realized as the sum and substance of my being. These truths taken into my consciousness constitute seeds of truth. And if I nurture them, feed them, water them, by remembering them, in conscious treatment, they spring forth into spiritual demonstration. Day after day after day, I have to take the important points of our correct letter of truth and take them into conscious treatment. I must never leave my home in the morning until I have established within myself the truth that I cannot be swayed by what I see, hear, taste, touch, or smell, since I am receptive and responsive only to the divine influence within my own being. I cannot leave my home until I have consciously realized God's presence is with me and it goes before me to make the crooked places straight. It is beside me. It comes up behind me as a rear guard. God permeates my being and all being. God fills all space, and my conscious realization of this is a law of protection unto everybody who comes within range of my consciousness, even the drunken driver over there. Pray for your enemies. Consciously realize that everyone on that road driving a car isn't driving at all. It's the mind of God acting in and through individual consciousness. And as individual consciousness, that is every driver. Until you have done this, until you have realized that God is your bread and your wine and your water, and that God is here where I am, for I in the midst of me is God, you have no right to be out on the street. You'll just be going out as an ordinary human being. And you know what a human being is now? A statistic. Ask the insurance company. They'll tell you all about you, including the day you should die, according to their records. If you don't, you disappoint them. Because you are a statistic if you are a human being. Don't be a statistic. Take possession of yourself. Take possession of your mind and your heart and your soul, but do it consciously. Don't do it wishy-washy, because it won't work. You must be as positive in your statements of treatment as I am being positive here tonight. Not quite, because I've been saying this for 30 years. But with a year or two of this, you could be as convinced of it as I am and have been for 30 years. But be positive. Be positive. You have dominion, but you only have dominion in proportion as you assume the dominion through truth. Always remembering, I of my own self am nothing. If I speak of myself, you know, I'm bearing witness to a lie. I'm speaking now of the dominion that I have through truth realized in my consciousness. I'm speaking of the infinite abundance that I have by God's grace, by grace of the fact that God is my being. Heaven forbid that I should ever believe that I of myself could be anything other than a transparency through which the activity of God is made manifest to this world. And that's what we're supposed to be. As the heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth showeth forth his handiwork, so must you and I bear witness to God's glory, not yours or mine. Never bear witness to your knowledge. Never bear witness to your powers. And above all things, never accept anyone's belief that you're spiritual. Don't do it. Give God the credit for being the infinite and all spirit. Because whether you know it or not, this is the truth. In all of my travels, in all of the spiritual men and women I've met, I mean men and women of spiritual life, even up to the mystics, I have never heard one yet admit that they felt spiritual. And so don't have any false ideas that you are ever going to feel spiritual. You aren't. You're just going to feel you. But if you let yourself be the transparency for that which is the Spirit and is therefore all spiritual, that spirituality will flow through you and as you. And by its fruits in the experience of those who touch your life, you'll know that it's there. You yourself won't feel it any more than an honest person feels honest. I'm sure you know the real nature of the people they call Honest John and Honest Jack and why they call it to them. So it is. Don't ever believe for a moment that you can feel honesty or feel that you are honest. You can be honest, but you can't feel it. If you could feel it, you would feel it in comparison with dishonesty, and so you'd have to have a little of each. No, you'll never feel honest, and neither will you feel spiritual. You'll only feel that you're doing the best that you possibly can do to keep truth alive in your consciousness, specific truth. Now, in the work that we are doing, we will be making use of the Infinite Way letters all the way through from 1954 to 1959. Why? because these letters have been my monthly contact with our students and have enabled me to give them every month specific principles to use, sometimes in treatment, sometimes in meditation, sometimes in just changing the mode of their living. But every single month of letters constitutes a specific lesson, or a lesson with specific principles. Now, the first thing that I'm asking all of our students to do for classwork, for the whole balance of this year, regardless of where the classes will be given, will be to take out of these monthly letters those chapters that deal with specific treatment or specific principles of the infinite way or protective work. Because, you see, protective work is one of the necessary functions of true students. Not protective work in the sense of protecting us from evil, but the protective work that establishes in our consciousness that there is only one power and that nothing else is power. You'll find that in the 1955, a chapter on protection.